Auburn can. Auburn's a team that the way they play, they're kind of there all the time. They played pretty well last year, obviously. When Cam Newton's there, they play good. They've had a run of very good teams and very good seasons. And if they can come out of this season with one loss or unscathed at all, I think they're the clear favorite to win, regardless if ACC Florida State stays undefeated or not. If Auburn can come out of this one loss or undefeated, I think they're the favorite to win it all. Because I mean, Ole Miss, Texas Tech, or Texas A&M, Georgia, and Alabama are all top 15. I mean, and then they got to play Mississippi State too, who's third right now. So if they can win all those games, they're head and shoulders. I think that's your clear cut team if they finish undefeated. We talked about it earlier on Tuesday, where was didn't have a clear cut team number one overall, head and shoulders above the rest. But if Auburn can go undefeated, I think they are that team. So I got Auburn winning that one in a close one, probably by field goal, last second field goal, maybe a little, maybe even less, maybe by a point or two. But that I think Auburn wins that one in a close one at Mississippi State, which yeah, that's gonna be difficult, but I think they do it. Another big game, Texas A&M is at home versus Ole Miss. Ole Miss is tied for third. I'm not quite sure how the whole tying thing works, but tied for third. And Bo Wallace has been putting on a Heisman-like game performance this season. 14 touchdowns, 1,522 passing yards, only 6 interceptions. So his interception to touchdown ratio is pretty good. He's throwing over 2 touchdowns per interception. And Texas A&M, yeah, they lost one, but they shouldn't have really lost. Mississippi State, yeah, that's the number tied for number 3 now. But I think Ole Miss is a little better than Texas A&M. They just beat Alabama. Even though it was at home, they did beat Alabama, a team that was number 3. Which is kind of saying some number 3 teams seem to be falling here recently. So maybe things trend right. We're seeing Ole Miss or Mississippi State fall. I got Mississippi State falling. I think Ole Miss wins over Texas A&M. Because Texas A&M, I mean, they played well against South Carolina, who's now unranked. And then they played Lamar, Rice, SMU, and Arkansas, and they beat Arkansas in overtime. I mean, we talked about how Arkansas could be a kind of spoiler for the SEC and all of them, but to come down and almost lose at home versus Arkansas, have to go to overtime, doesn't bode well. And then you got lose to number 12 Mississippi State. At Mississippi State, yeah, but Ole Miss coming off of that win, I think they are a force to be reckoned with, and Ole Miss goes ahead and wins that one. Probably by 5 or 6. I think that's a fair assessment. Maybe 2 field goals, something like that. I don't think they win. Texas A&M is actually favored to win. But just the way Ole Miss came off of that win, I can't pick against them right now. Another big one, we'll leave the SEC, because we kind of were there for a little while. That's kind of where the big teams are right now. Moved to the Pac-12, or the Big 10, sorry. Big 12. Switched up a bunch of them. You got TCU headed to Baylor. Now, this game's big for both teams, because Baylor hasn't really played anybody. TCU has beat Oklahoma, who was ranked 4th. They beat them last week, and that kind of put them from 25th to 9th, or right around 25th to 9th. And Baylor, on the other hand, ranked 5th, but they haven't beat a team that is any threat. I mean, Iowa State they beat. Okay, Iowa State is 1-4. They haven't won a game. They beat Texas. Texas falling apart. I mean, Charlie Strong may not even make it through the season, and they got a losing record. Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo, they got an even record, and they're playing nobodies. You got Northwestern State, not a winning season, and then SMU, they started off there, who's hasn't won a game. So they've played and beaten one team that has an even record. They haven't beat a team that has a winning record. TCU is undefeated with a winning record, and coming off of a pretty big win. And momentum's really big in college football. I mean, you beat the number 4 team in the nation at home. People get behind you on that. And I think they're taking that into Baylor, and they're going to beat Baylor, because Baylor hasn't played anybody. and TCU, as we saw, can beat the bigger foes like Oklahoma. So I think TCU takes out Baylor pretty handedly, actually. I think they can probably win by 12 points. Baylor's projected to win by about 7.5. I think TCU pulls, I guess, an upset. I mean, top 10, it's not really an upset if they're both top 10, but I guess you want to call it the upset, and I think TCU wins probably by 12, 10 to 12 points, I think. I think TCU is the better team here, and they've kind of shown it throughout. I'd say one thing to be worried about this week, if you're an Alabama fan, they're playing Arkansas. I mentioned Arkansas can be one of those teams that kind of play spoiler to a team and kind of make them miss the playoffs. I think Arkansas may be that team for Alabama. Alabama did just lose, but if they can stay one loss, they'll be okay. I think they'll probably still make it. But the way they just looked, they were discombobulated against Ole Miss. At Ole Miss, yes. They're at Arkansas. Arkansas obviously is not a better team than Ole Miss, but Arkansas can put a game together here and there, taking Texas A&M to overtime last week. And I think they pose a threat to Alabama. I really do. I think Alabama right now is in shambles. The way their secondary looked, the offense couldn't click. They scored 17 points, and they didn't score below 30 before that, and then they scored 17. Arkansas, like I said, isn't the best team in the world. They run the ball well, however. They're seventh in rushing and seventh for points for. Their defense isn't great, but we'll see how it goes. Points for Alabama's dropped to 30th, so if you went just based on that, and that's really off of the just duck they put up with 17 points against Ole Miss. So I'd say Alabama's probably going to win, but it's probably going to be by a field goal or a little less because Arkansas is going to kind of play spoiler there and try to ruin Alabama's chance at the playoffs. Moving to the Pac-12, I jumped ahead there for a couple minutes, but Pac-12, you got Oregon traveling to UCLA. Now, earlier in the season, you probably said this may go for who moves into the championship game because this two teams that were highly regarded coming into the season. But Oregon coming off of a loss to Arizona last week, and then you got UCLA who has one loss and really hasn't looked too dominating besides their win over Arizona State. I mean, they beat Texas by 3. They beat Memphis by 9, 10, not even 10 points. They barely beat Virginia. They beat Virginia by 8. And then they just lost to an unranked Utah by 2 at home. So that's something where, yes, Oregon's traveling to them, and I think Oregon wins this game. I don't think UCLA is as good as people thought. But looking at the beginning of the season and looking at the schedule of UCLA and Oregon, you would have thought that this would be maybe Oregon had a loss with Michigan State, but after they won that, you would have thought that this would be a matchup where both teams are undefeated, and this really sets apart who gets the Pac-12 spot in the playoffs because the Pac-12 team at the time you figured would get a spot. Now it looks like maybe Arizona's that Pac-12 team going undefeated. USC has kind of done nothing all season. It's an interesting kind of mashing of the divisions and the conferences. It looks like SEC might get 2, like we were saying. ACC is probably going to have Florida State, and then it looks like a Big 12 team. I think the Pac-12 is probably going to miss out on the playoffs if it keeps going like this, because I think TCU is probably pretty good. Ole Miss, Auburn, Mississippi State, all of them have a chance at it. They're all undefeated right now. So one of them are probably going to finish undefeated. Florida State's probably going to finish undefeated. And I think you take a one-loss SEC team over Arizona at the time being. I mean, right now they have Alabama over Arizona, and I know the rankings don't mean that much to the choosing of the teams in the playoffs, but kind of speaks a little volumes there, so we'll see there. I think if the upset of the week, I guess you want to call it, I think Georgia Tech gets their first loss. Georgia Tech's 5-0 in the ACC. They are ranked 22nd, but they're playing Duke. I really like the way Duke plays. They lost to Miami. They did not play well in that one. They only scored 10. where they hadn't scored below 30 again, just like Alabama. But they're at Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech hasn't played too many people. Yeah, they beat Tech, but they only beat Tech by 3, and Tech showed that they weren't the best team. They weren't the team that everybody thought they were. And Duke played well last year, and I think they are building off of that. Duke's 4-1, so they're right on the cusp of the top 25. I think they beat Georgia Tech and kind of move into that. Probably just take Georgia Tech's spot at 22. And then you finish it out. Last ranked versus ranked, and again, it's back in the SEC. You got Georgia traveling to Missouri. Both teams kind of a little disappointing this year. Georgia was supposed to be Georgia was a lot of people's first picks to be the one to win the SEC. They didn't think Alabama had it this year and everything, and then they lose the second game to South Carolina by 3. It was close at South Carolina, but South Carolina has been playing well. I mean, they've lost to Kentucky, Missouri, who's now ranked, and Texas A&M at the beginning of the season. They've got 3 losses. Georgia's 13th. I think Georgia wins, but I think they aren't poised for a season they were expecting to have, just because I don't think Missouri is actually that good. They've beaten one ranked team. They lost to Indiana. They beat South Carolina, who was 13th at the time. And I mean, Georgia, though, if they win this one, they probably shouldn't lose again until Auburn. Maybe again Arkansas. Like I said, kind of the spoiler upset team. Kentucky's been playing that a little bit, but they probably shouldn't lose for another 3 weeks, and then they travel. They stay at home, and Auburn travels to them, and I think Auburn beats them there. I think Georgia wins this one, 7 points, probably by touchdown. It's gonna be that one will be fun to watch. They're projected to win by 3. I think they'll win by touchdown. I was on at noon, so there's your noon game. If you don't want to watch Florida State, just destroy Syracuse because that's what's gonna happen. Then you got your 3 o'clock in Auburn, Mississippi State, along with TCU and Baylor, and then you finish the night out with Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Maybe get a little Alabama, Arkansas in there at 6 if you're looking for something to do. But that's kind of how it's gonna go. We'll see what happens in that. Talk about it on Thursday. But we'll see how much the rankings change. I think if Auburn or Mississippi State, if either of those teams win, unless Florida wins by 50, I think they get jumped. I know, oh, you can't, they didn't lose, you shouldn't jump them. But if Auburn beats the number 3 team in the nation, or Mississippi State beats the number 2 team in the nation, and it's not, if it's a blowout, they have to. If Auburn or Mississippi State wins by 10 or more, they automatically jump Florida regardless, unless Florida wins by 90. Florida State, that is, wins by like 90. But if Florida State wins by 50 or less, and it's a close one, and either of those teams, I think they got to jump Florida State just because Florida State isn't really playing anybody. And actually, in one ranking, ESPN's power ranking, they have Auburn above Florida State right now. So I think if they beat Mississippi State, that's going to be something to watch. Auburn jump Florida State, and TCU will probably jump in the top 5 if they win. But it'll be a fun week in college football. And then you got Old Dominion, of course. They're playing. Hopefully they can do a little better than they've been doing. They're playing UTEP this week at UTEP. That game's at 8 o'clock, kind of a night game. UTEP's projected to win by about a field goal. Old Dominion really coming off of 2 bad losses at home, something they don't like to see. I mean, Middle Tennessee, Friday night game, they just dismantled Old Dominion. And then Marshall came in here, and it wasn't even close. They gave up 200 yards rushing to Marshall's running back. UTEP is 0-1 in the CUSA. Old Dominion's 1-2. UTEP's played one last game. They're 2-3. Old Dominion's 3-3. Old Dominion needs to win this one to get back on the winning track. That's really something they need to pride themselves on if they want to kind of crawl their way back into this. Because I mean, if you look at it, other than Marshall, Florida Atlantic, and Middle Tennessee, who are all undefeated in the conference, and Marshall's undefeated on the season, they're behind Florida Atlantic and UAB. They can pass both of those if they win and those two lose. But this is a big game for Old Dominion to get the winning back on their side, kind of get some morale boost, so they can go ahead and try to win the next few games they got. They got 3 away games. They UTEP obviously this week, and then Western Kentucky and Vanderbilt. It's gonna be a long, long, long week if they lose to UTEP. I'm sure coach is gonna be giving them an earful. But moving on to the big boys in the NFL. AJ Green is likely out Sunday with a foot injury. If you got him in fantasy, you should probably sit him. He got turf toe. He thought it was turf toe in practice. He was carried out on a cart. They say he's probably not going to play versus the Panthers this weekend. And coming off of a loss versus the Patriots, they kind of needed AJ Green. But doesn't look like he's playing, so they're going to run the ball a lot, I'm guessing. And it's going to be Sanu's really going to be the receiver to step up. So if you have him, obviously start him. And we'll see how Andy Dalton does without his star receiver in AJ Green. He's one of the best receivers in the league if he can stay healthy. Another injury update. You got Calvin Johnson. He's been dealing with a high ankle sprain. They're not quite sure if he's going to play or not. It's kind of a last-minute decision. But that's something to worry about because he hasn't been on the top of his game like he has been recently. I mean, he has really been, competing for best wide receiver of all time. The way he's been playing, the way he was just doing everything on the field, really just bullying the defenses that he went against. Now it seems like he isn't on that high of a level, and I think the injury is due to that. So we'll see if he comes out and plays. It's kind of a we'll wait and see mentality with him. It really is a rest is the treatment and recovery to it. He suffered it last month, and it's still nagging him. So he may get to sit here. Yeah, he may get to sit this week against, I believe they play. I'm actually not sure who they play. I got the schedule up here. But hopefully he'll get to sit this week. He really needs that because, well, he's injured. And that's something he really needs to heal that ankle. If he wants to be at the level he was and has been. And they play Minnesota, so they probably shouldn't need him too much. Minnesota's been kind of not great. So I think rest is the best thing for him, and we'll see if coach decides to rest him this week or if he feels like he needs him. And then I mentioned Adrian Peterson back in tabloids, back in the headlines. He was arrested after he failed his drug test because he smoked some marijuana before it, and then he failed. So now he was his bail was revoked. And well, he's fallen off. It's not good to see a player like him kind of who was at the peak of their career and kind of looking to be one of the best running backs of all time. And then something like this comes out where it's what was it? The scandal about him hitting his child and could go to jail for 6 to 12 months or 6 months to 2 years. And then along with the now this, and there was the scandal of him spending his charity money on hotels and hookers. It's just not looking good for him now. At the beginning, everybody was like, "Oh, that doesn't seem right." But I guess when you find something and you dig more into it, you find more and more and more about the guy until it's kind of all aired out, and we're seeing it all being aired out now, where you can't do that, especially on probation like that. He was smoking marijuana right before a urine test. That's not a smart move by Adrian Peterson, especially if he wanted to come back and play at least this year. I mean, this year wasn't looking good. Now it's a no. And you look at the chance of him playing again, and it's kind of slim. His chances are really dwindling to play in the NFL again. There's talk that he may get traded. Minnesota's not going to want that cap room, and they probably won't drop him just because of that. But if he really wants to play again in the NFL, he's going to have to clean up his act. because he's got at least 6 month or 6 game suspension for the domestic abuse and all of that. The marijuana, since he got busted there, that's a game or two. So he's probably missing a whole season. So we're looking at him at 33 coming back, something like that. And after 30, running backs really fall off. You look at any running back from uh, Barry Johnson or Barry Sanders to Jerome Bettis, and you just look at a bunch of players who hit 30 as a running back. They've really fallen off and not done what they had before the age of 30. So that's something to look out, see what happens there. Gotta pick our games this week. So starting with Thursday night. Thursday night's a big one for both teams really. Houston's kind of been a team that a lot of people didn't expect to be where they're at now. They're playing pretty well. They lost obviously last week to Dallas, but before that I think they had only lost one game. They're at home versus Indianapolis tonight, versus the best quarterback in the league right now. You got to go with the quarterback, yeah. J.J. Watt in the defense is something to not be messed with. But the way that Andrew Luck and the Colts are able to just slice and dice the defenses they play against, and really took them a little while. But you got to remember they played versus Denver first game and then Philadelphia the second game, and they only lost by 3 to Philadelphia, and they should have really won it because they played awful that second half. And they went out and torched Jacksonville, torched Tennessee, who had the best passing defense at the time, and then beat Baltimore last week. I think they continue this run at Houston and win tonight. Probably by 14. I think Houston really just has a defense. I don't think their offense is great. Yeah, their running game is pretty good, and that's going to be something that hurts Indianapolis because we all know Indianapolis' defense is awful. I think Arian Foster is going to have a pretty good day, but I think Fitzpatrick struggles a little bit while Andrew Luck and the Colts go to victory. Then you got Sunday games, obviously. Jacksonville at Tennessee. I think Jacksonville gets off the snide. I think Jacksonville finally gets that W that they've been looking for. The way Bortles, when Bortles came in, he's played versus some pretty good teams. He came in versus Indianapolis, San Diego, and Pittsburgh. I mean, he had his best game versus Pittsburgh. They didn't even score a touchdown. He got 3 field goals. But I mean, he put up some solid numbers. He's already got as many touchdowns as Henne, who started it. More yardage, better completion rate. I think it's Bortles' time to get his first career win. Tennessee's pretty bad. Their defense has somehow been there. They're at the time again they had opposing passing yards. That was down. They lost to they beat Kansas City, and then they've lost to Dallas, Cincinnati, Indianapolis. They should have beat the Cleveland Browns last week, but obviously they let that one go and lost by a point. I think they're just down in the dumps and they don't have a whole lot. And I think Jacksonville and the rookie quarterback in Bortles finally gets the first win. Then you got the Ravens at Tampa Bay. I think the Ravens win. Tampa Bay really hasn't been able to put a whole lot together this season. Yeah, they beat Pittsburgh in some shocking fashion, scoring a touchdown in the last 30 seconds of the game to win. They've lost to Carolina close. They lost to St. Louis close. Then they got destroyed by Atlanta, beat Pittsburgh. Lost last week to New Orleans in overtime at home versus Baltimore. I think Baltimore's a little better team than the majority of the teams they play there, minus Carolina. Atlanta, the way they put it on them, I think that's going to be similar to what Baltimore does to Tampa Bay. Joe Flacco has a pretty good day. I don't think they run the ball well. I think Tampa Bay makes them throw it, and Joe Flacco's okay with that and throws it very well. Denver travels to New York to play the Jets. Obviously, the Broncos favor to win by quite a lot. The Jets are having quarterback problems with Geno Smith, Mike Vick. Who is it going to be? Who's it going to be? While Peyton Manning and the Broncos are just having a phenomenal season. Only lost once, and it was in overtime to Seattle. they just put a beat down on Arizona. Arizona also coming into the season, I said probably had one of the best defenses in the league, and well, it hasn't been that way. But back to Denver versus the Jets. The Jets just can't do anything. They've beaten Oakland, and that was close. And Oakland's awful. Oakland hasn't won a game yet. And the Jets, they're the first team to be shut out this season for San Diego. San Diego is, yes, a very good team this year, but I think Denver's a better team. Maybe not defensive-wise. They probably get a couple points, but I think Peyton Manning has a day. I mean, Peyton Manning's probably going to throw for 400 yards. He's going to rival his first game last season, where he threw for like 400 yards and 5 touchdowns. I think he just torches the defense of the Jets and has a career day because the Jets look like they're in shambles. Detroit versus Minnesota. Detroit travels to Minnesota. A lot of this one depends on what Bridgewater is doing. I know he's been injured a little bit. He had that ankle injury. He's probable to play. So that in mind, I think Minnesota can probably pull the upset. I don't think any team in that division is head and shoulders above any other team. The way that they've all been playing, Green Bay hasn't looked great. Chicago hasn't looked great. Minnesota hasn't looked great, but they looked pretty good against Atlanta when Bridgewater was in there. And I'm a fan of Bridgewater. I think he's pretty good. But the way that Bridgewater played, it's gonna be pretty good for them. I think they beat Detroit. Detroit's having some injury problems. Reggie Bush, all them. Calvin Johnson, I just mentioned, will probably sit. For that reason, I think Minnesota, probably the surprise team of the week. I think they can go ahead and beat Detroit, and they're at home. They're outside because they're waiting on the new stadium to be built, so they're playing at a college stadium. Detroit plays in a dome. I think the weather's starting to get colder. It's going to be a little cold in Minnesota. I think that helps them a little bit. I think Minnesota wins it. Close, but Minnesota wins it. New England's traveling to Buffalo. I think New England, the way they played last week, that speaks in volumes to what they're capable of doing. And Cincinnati was supposed to have one of the best teams in the league, undefeated before that. Everybody thought they were going to be the best team in the league, and now they're not. So Buffalo hasn't been playing great. They're not quite sure who their quarterback is. Yeah, they won last week with Kyle Orton at quarterback, but he's only thrown for a touchdown. They barely beat Detroit. At Detroit, yes, I'll give you that. But like I just said, Detroit hasn't been playing well all season. New England finally, I think, figured it out and may be able to go on a little run here. They'll probably beat Buffalo, probably beat the Jets. Chicago will be tough for them. Denver, they'll probably lose. But I think Buffalo is going to be an easy win for them. I think Tom Brady has a game that we expect Tom Brady to have. He hasn't really had one of those yet. Last week he was pretty good. I think this week, though, Tom Brady connects with Edelman and probably 2 touchdowns for Edelman. I think Tom Brady has a good day on Tom Brady level, and they win pretty handily over Buffalo, even though it's at Buffalo. Panthers go ahead and travel to the Bengals. I got the Panthers winning because I think they figured it out. Panthers, yeah, they beat Chicago last week. First half, they looked awful. The first half, they gave up 3 touchdowns. And then Cam Newton and the Panthers found a way back. They fought back versus the Bears and Jay Cutler. And I think they finally figured out the defense a little bit. Cam Newton's getting a little more healthy each week. They raced a 14-point deficit, came back and won. I mean, they scored a touchdown, then they gave up 3 straight touchdowns, and gave up a field goal the rest of the game. They only gave up a field goal in the second half. And I think they can carry that defense against Cincinnati, who is missing their star receiver in A.J. Green. So that's something that helps them out defensive-wise. And for that, I think they win it. I think Cam Newton has a productive day, something we haven't seen from him a whole lot recently because of that injury he's had. Hasn't been too mobile. but I think he's getting more healthy, and he'll figure out a way to kind of scramble a little bit, get some free time, and find Greg Olson, Kelvin Benjamin, all of them in the end zone, beating Cincinnati, even though it's at Cincinnati. Pittsburgh traveling to Cleveland. This game's interesting because the way they played the first game of the season, and for a while it looks like the Steelers were just going to run away with it. I mean, up by 27 or something like that, 24 I believe. And Cleveland came storming back. They were up 27-0 or something like that. And then Cleveland came storming back 27 to 3. Pittsburgh led up 24 in the second half and then got a final second field goal. This week is going to be an interesting week for both of them. I think the Steelers win by a field goal again. It's at Cleveland. I'm not sold on Cleveland. I'm not sold on that whole team. They've lost the two divisional teams they've played, Pittsburgh and Baltimore. They beat New Orleans by 2 and Tennessee by 1. So they haven't played spectacular when they've won. New Orleans hasn't looked great, so you can't say that's a team that's kind of a resume builder at this point in time. Maybe if they get a little better. Tennessee, obviously not a resume builder either, and they barely beat Tennessee at that. They had to have miraculous comebacks. So I think they lose this week. I think it's close, but I think they lose this week probably by 4 points. But it comes down to the last second heave by Hoyer and batted down. It'll be a good one though. That'll be a fun one to watch. Green Bay travels to Miami. I think the Packers win this one. I think they found their running game versus Minnesota, something they really needed. Eddie Lacy got back on his snide, or off his snide, sorry. You got Aaron Rodgers playing well now. Randall Cobb's having a phenomenal year along with Jordy Nelson. I think just all those things are going to overpower Miami, and win that game for Green Bay. Even though Miami's looking okay this year, not record-wise, they're 2-2. But I think even though they're at home, and Rodgers and the Packers find a way to win. San Diego travels to Oakland. San Diego is going to just destroy Oakland. Oakland hasn't won a game yet, and I don't see them winning a game this week. San Diego is probably one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league right now. Probably not the best, but they're right there at the top of discussions the way they've been playing recently. Their quarterback in Phillip Rivers is having MVP year. Something you weren't expecting me to say at the beginning of the season. Nobody was. They've only lost one game, and it was by 1 to Arizona, at Arizona at the beginning of the season. Then they beat Seattle, New York, Jacksonville, Buffalo. Not great teams, but Oakland's not a great team either. And I think Phillip Rivers just continues his MVP bid season and goes ahead and beats Oakland. Chicago's traveling to Atlanta. Chicago just seems to find a way to bounce back after a loss. That's kind of been their forte this season. Other than last week, obviously, they lost to Buffalo, then they beat San Francisco, New York, then they lost to Green Bay and Carolina. I don't think Atlanta's as good as they've kind of shown. They beat New Orleans and then they beat Tampa. They lost to Cincinnati, Minnesota, and New York. I think they lose to Chicago. Brandon Marshall will have a pretty good day. Alshon Jeffrey, Matt Forte. I think Forte is probably going to have the best day out of them all. Atlanta's rushing defense is awful, the 28th in the league. And for that reason, Forte is going to carry them all the way to a win versus Atlanta, even though Atlanta's at home. Dallas travels to Seattle. I got to take the Seahawks. I'm not a big Seahawks fan, but I don't think Dallas is ready to take on the Seahawks. DeMarco Murray, this will be a real test of how good he is, how good he's playing this year. I mean, he's played St. Louis, who had a pretty good rushing defense. Houston, who's got a pretty good front line. But other than that, I mean, San Francisco. But I think the reason that Dallas loses this game is because they get away from that. I can see them getting down early and deciding they have to throw it. And Tony Romo having a 2 interception, 3 interception game that we've seen from him before in bigger games. Just because I think they rely on him to throw it more than he's been throwing it recently because they get down by too much to run the ball with Murray. And that's going to be the reason Seattle wins, because Seattle's defense is one of the best, if not the best, in the league, especially in rushing. I mean, they're going to shut down Murray, I think, and that's going to lead, like I said, lead them to have to throw it often. Then the Redskins are traveling to Arizona. Arizona, even though their defense looked awful last week, they still have a good defense, and I think they're a better team than Washington. Washington hasn't been looking great. Yeah, they did pretty well against Seattle. That was at home, though, at Monday night. They lost by 10, and that's pretty good. The only team they've beaten is Jacksonville. They've lost to the Giants, Philadelphia, Houston, and Seattle. Traveling to Arizona, Arizona is figuring out their kind of how they're going to play this. Their defense is doing, like I said, not as good as we thought, but the real standout guy is Andre Ellington. Ellington, the running back for Arizona, has just been on a tear this year. Something you kind of didn't expect from him. There was talk here and there about him. It's only his second season, and he's going to run all over Washington's defense and lead the Cardinals to a pretty convincing victory. Then the night game is the Giants against the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles started off hot, obviously. Sean McCoy hasn't done a whole lot, and he will continue to not do a whole lot, and the Giants will win this game. The Giants have a good defensive line. Tyler always likes to mention that. They have top 10 defensive line in allowing opponent rushing yards. And I think they've figured it out. The Giants have figured it out. They've won 3 straight: Atlanta, Washington, Houston. Eli Manning's actually looking like a decent quarterback now, not throwing the ball to the other team. Victor Cruz is probably going to get in for a little bit. He's finally going to find the end zone. He's only found it once this entire season, although his yardage has been pretty good. And I think they shocked Philadelphia and beat Philadelphia at Philadelphia. Something not a whole lot of people are expecting, especially since Philadelphia started off strong. I mean, they won 3 straight, then they lost to San Francisco, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown, and then they just beat St. Louis. But I think the Giants found the key they need to win it all, or to not win it all, but to win this game and kind of continue throughout the season. And with that win, I believe they take the top of the NFC East, maybe tied with the Cowboys. It'll be an interesting one, though. And then Monday night game, San Francisco at St. Louis. I think the 49ers win this one pretty easily. St. Louis, all they really have is that running back in Stacy. The running game is what I meant. They other than that, they don't have a whole lot. And if they don't have that running attack, which they won't because San Francisco's running defense is superb, they're going to struggle. And they're going to struggle against San Francisco. Even though Kaepernick's not a great quarterback, Frank Gore is a good running back. Frank Gore is going to run all over St. Louis. So that's my picks. We'll figure out how well they are. When we come back on Thursday, we'll go over them, see what happened, see how well I did with the picks. And we'll get you a power rankings on Thursday next week if we had enough time. We ran out of time today. But I thank you for tuning in to Cup Check, the best sports radio show in the world, on WODU, the best in college radio. Enjoy your break from us. You don't got us for a week. But until then, have a good rest of the weekend, I guess. Weekend's coming up. Rest of the week, too. And I'll see you on Thursday.